So this video, we're going to start getting the player to shoot out projectiles. That'll be an important part of our game because the object in our game is to shoot down obstacles before they have a chance to reach the other side of the playing field. So why don't we just head straight on to it? I'll actually give us a little preview first of what the shooting mechanic will look like. So why don't we go ahead and press play. You can see that the bullet travels a little bit faster than other obstacles, and the bullets are instantiated or spawned out the front of my gun type. I guess that little cylinder can be called my gun. And they work pretty good. They shoot in the right direction, and we have control over their speed. And we're ready to start adding collision here in a second, with obstacles colliding with walls, with players, and bullets colliding with obstacles. But first, we have to get that shooting mechanic figured out. So let's go ahead and figure that out. All right, the first step is making a moving prefab for our bullet. So we have to actually create our bullet before we can start firing it. So I'm simply going to just make a 3D object. We're going to make little spheres as our bullet here. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of scale down my bullet. Let's scale it down to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. So the bullet can come out of our gun. And that looks to be pretty good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and now hide my player so I can just focus on my bullet. I'm going to reset its position to the center of the grid, and I'm going to remove the sphere collider up here in my inspector. All right, so I just simply went to that cog and did remove component on the actual collider there. Next, why don't we call this bullet underscore mesh? Okay. And then we're going to make a new empty game object. We're going to reset its transforms. And we're going to call this just regular old bullet, like so. Then we're going to parent our bullet mesh under our bullet empty game object. And we're going to assign a tag to our bullet. We're going to go to add tag. And we're going to call this one bullet, like so. All right, after I've created my tag, I have to go back. There we go. And assign my bullet tag, like so. And we're almost done. Now why don't we go to our scripts folder and select our mover script. We're going to use our mover script and attach that to our bullet empty game object. That looks pretty good. And why don't we go ahead and slide our bullet to our prefabs folder here at the bottom of our Unity window. And now we have a bullet prefab next to our obstacle and power up and player. Okay, so we got our bullet prefab made, so we can go ahead and get it out of the scene. Why don't I bring back my player? So with my bullet prefab now made, I can go ahead and go and create my player fire script that will attach to my player. So in my scripts folder, I'm going to right click and create a brand new C# script. Call this player fire. And I'm going to attach my player fire script to my player object right here. And before I get into the next bit, I'm going to, before we get into code, I'm actually going to create a empty game object. We'll reset its transforms. And we're going to call this, I don't know, bullet spawn. Or bullet, yeah, let me get the correct, bullet spawn point. And this right here is where our bullet's actually going to spawn from. As you can see, it's an empty game object. So we're going to move that empty game object to wherever your model is going to be shooting its bullets from. So I'm going to put it at the very tip of my little gun there. And then I'm going to parent it underneath my player. So I have my parent player game object. And then under my parent play object, I have the player mesh. And now I have a bullet spawn point. And after I've attached my player fire script, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and press apply on this prefab here. There we go. All right, so now I've updated my prefab. player prefab, I have a bullet spawn point and a bullet fire script attached to it. So let's double click my player fire script and open up player fire. Get rid of some of these other scripts we don't really want to look at right now. So the first thing we're going to do is create some variables here that will be used to describe the behavior of my firing. So first we need to make a public game object, and we need to call this bullet object. This is what's we're gonna assign the our prefab to. All right, there we go. And then we're gonna make another public game object called bullet spawn, where our bullet will actually spawn from. And then let's make a public float called bullet speed. All right, we'll save that, and everything's looking good so far. So now, why don't we go ahead and create a void update function? And it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to say if input.getKey down, and then we're looking for key code. We're going to say what key we're going to press here. So key code dot spacebar. I'm going to use a spacebar to shoot, and we'll close those parentheses down and create my curly brackets. And inside of this if statement that checks to see if I've pressed my spacebar, I'm going to say instantiate, and then we're going to instantiate my bullet object that we just described up here, that we just declared. And that's what we're going to spawn. Now we need to say where it's going to spawn. So we'll use my empty game object bullet spawn point. We'll say bullet spawn dot transform dot position. So the actual position of my bullet spawn empty game object I just made a few minutes ago. And then we got to define its rotation, and we don't really want to mess with its rotation so much, so we'll just do a quaternion identity to give it just a default rotational value, and we'll close it out with a semicolon. We'll hit Control S to save, and let's look at my player script now. You can see at the very bottom with my player fire script, I don't have any values assigned right now. So why don't I go to my prefabs folder, and I'm going to drag and drop my bullet into my bullet object. I'm going to go up to my player game object in my hierarchy and drag and drop my bullet spawn point into my bullet spawn public game object variable. And I'm going to give my bullet speed a value of 20. So the bullet will be traveling 20 units. All right, so why don't we go ahead and see what happens when we press play. All right, well, we're not firing. It looks like we're just laying eggs or laying mines. It's not really doing what we want it to do. That's because we need to update our mover script to account for the unique direction and speed that our bullets will be traveling. So why don't we go ahead and add direction and movement to our bullets. All right, so let's look at our mover script to figure out what we have to do here. And previously, we figured out how to get our power-ups and our obstacles moving at the right speed and in the right direction. So why don't we go ahead and use this same kind of logic right here to do the same thing. We know that every object with our mover script requires two very important variables, which is our move direction, which is the vector, or basically, are we moving from right to left, left to right, up to down? We also need to give our object, our moving object, a speed to travel. So that's what we have to do. How are we going to get these two values for our player bullets, though? Well, we're going to have to pass in values, kind of like how we did in our spawners. We passed in, for our obstacles, we passed in the obstacle direction and the obstacle speed. Well, the bullets are going to be a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and open up my player mover script as well, because I have to pass in my bullet speed variable from my player fire script. Then I have to go to another script, and I have to figure out, well, wait a minute, I don't have a string variable. Let's look at my obstacle controller script real quickly. Remember how we had a public string and then obstacle direction? This value right here contains the string up, down, left, or right, and that's what we passed into our mover script right here. So that's what told our mover script in which direction our obstacles and power-ups will be moving. But if I go to my player script, I don't even have a variable or a string variable that will pass that in. So I'm going to have to figure out how we can get the direction of my player that will basically say, okay, if I'm facing right, I want to shoot right. I need to get a variable from my player mover into my mover script to get my bullet moving in the right direction. And it's going to be actually pretty simple. What we'll say is, why don't we come down in here and make a public string, and why don't we call this shoot direction? All right, this is the direction that we're going to be shooting in, and it's going to be controlled by which direction our player is facing. And if you remember, we set our player's rotation in our player mover script down here in this move function. So depending on what key we've pressed up here, so if we press A, we're going to be moving to the left. So we rotate our player 180 degrees to look to the left. So now that we have this public string shoot direction, after we call our move function to actually get our player to move in that direction, why don't we go ahead and set the value of shoot direction to, what are we going to set it to? I guess since this is left, we'll type in left. Well, we're going to run into an interesting problem right here, because in our mover right here, we've defined if move direction equals right. Right here, we've defined that the direction that the string right pertains to, the vector direction that pertains to. And whenever we were coding this earlier, our direction related to if we're moving from right to left. All right, so right means we're going to be moving from the right side, moving our bullet to the very left. So it's almost kind of backwards, I guess. So you might think, okay, if our move direction is right, then we shoot to the right. Well, the way we coded it, it was from right to left. So we have to keep that in mind whenever we're setting our player move string values up here. So if we're looking to the left, then we want to shoot a bullet from right to left. And as I just described, right to left means we have to call the string right, or we have to use a string of right. So actually, we'll type in right there. So we'll use that same logic. And right now, you can make a decision to go back and kind of change this logic. So if you wanted move direction to be right, you could go back in and change vector 3 to right. But then you'd have to go back in and update, the spawn controllers, all that stuff. So we're just going to keep rolling with what we got, and keep in mind that our direction doesn't mean the place it's headed, but the direction that it started from. It started from the right and it moves to the left. A little confusing, but it's all about keeping your logic congruent, your naming conventions working for you. And we're just going to do that we're going to go back to my player mover script, and we're just going to make this kind of logic for every single time we press a key on our keyboard that will rotate our player in the new direction. So we have to update our shoot direction every time we do that. And if we press D on our keyboard, our player faces right. So we have to make our shoot direction from left to right. So our shoot direction will equal left. And that'll activate this line of code in my mover script that actually says, okay, bullet, you're going to move from left to right now. All right. Hopefully that's not too confusing. But if you get in there and make mistakes and you find your bullets are traveling the wrong way, all you have to do is just come back in here and just make sure you get the right strings in there. So we've taken care of our A key. We've taken care of our D key. Let's go down into our W key for moving upwards. And we're just going to say shoot direction equals down. Since we're facing upwards, we're going to be shooting from down the top. So our shoot direction will equal down, and then that'll fire off the code over here that moves our bullets from the bottom to the top of the screen. And we got one more thing to do over here in our player mover. We're going to do shooter equals up, because as we press S on the keyboard right here, our character is going to be facing downwards, so it needs to shoot from top to bottom, from up to down. whichever naming convention you feel more comfortable with referring that to. All right, so now we've accounted for the direction we're going to be shooting from. So I'm going to go ahead and press Control and S, and I'm going to select my player. And then if I go to my player mover, I have a new variable called shoot direction right here. All right. So as we play our game, keep an eye on this shoot direction variable right here in our inspector. So as you can see, as I face right, our shoot direction will be left from left to right. As I face right, my shoot direction will be from right to left. And then we can see my shoot direction is updating depending on which way I'm looking. All right, that's great. So now we have a direction string that we can pass into our mover class right here, our mover script, to get things working for us. All right. So we've got our player mover figuring out which direction we need to send our bullets in. Now we actually need to come to our mover script up here and create a new conditional check below our power up and obstacle checks right here. We're going to say else if our game object dot tag equals bullet. So that's meaning if the object that we've trying to move across the screen, if its tag equals bullet, then we're going to do the code that will update its move direction and its move speed. All right. So to get our move direction and our move speed working, remember earlier we had to pass in two separate variables for my player fire bullet speed and my player mover, the new public string we made, shoot direction. I have to pass these two variables into my mover script so I can update my move direction and move speed for bullets. So there's going to be 3 steps to do this. First, we have to find the player game object. All right, our player game object is this guy in our hierarchy right now. It's our little tank guy right here. And we have to find this object because this object contains the player mover component and the player fire component right here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these rigid body and collider things. I just want to focus on player mover and player fire. We have to get to shoot direction variable and we have to get to bullet speed variable right there. So we have to create, we have to find out in our code how to access that player object. So to do that, we're going to say game object. So we're making a type of variable right now. We're actually declaring a variable right now, and we're going to call this variable player object. Okay, and then we're going to set its value equal to, and then we're going to do something pretty nice with tags. We're going to say game object dot find game object with tag. That's going to be singular. Find game object, not objects. Game object with tag, and then what tag are we going to find? We're going to find our player tag. So after you make this line of code, we need to double check something. We need to go into our hierarchy and select our player object right here. And we have to make sure its tag is set to player. All right. Unity already has a player tag built into it. So it's pretty simple. Just make sure your player's tag is set to player. And I'll hit apply on the prefab just to make sure that that is saved to all my player prefabs. All right. So now I know that whenever my bullet is created, it's going to see, okay, the game object tag for what's going to move across my screen. Oh yeah, its tag is bullet. Okay, so we'll do this code here. So we're going to find my player game object so I can get at its scripts that we made, so I can get to those 2 important direction and speed variables. All right, so now the second step is we need to make like these window variables that look into our scripts attached to our player fire. So to do that, we're going to say, okay, first we have to give this new variable. We got to make a new variable. We're going to give this variable the type of player fire. And if that looks familiar, that's because we're actually referencing our player fire script here. We're making a variable of type player fire. Okay, so we're going to say player fire. and let's just give it a temporary name here. So why don't we just make it simple and call it fire? So this new variable fire is actually going to point to the player fire script on my player game object. So fire is going to equal player object. So we're going to use this variable that we just assigned a value to. So basically we're pointing at our player object right now because we did the find game object with tag right there. So we're going to say player fire equals player object, and then we're going to do a get component call right there. So we're going to say, okay, I want to get at a component on my player object. And then what do I want to get at? We're going to use a less than sign. And then we're going to get at the player fire script that we have attached to it. And then we're going to close it off with an empty parentheses and a semicolon. Let's do the same thing for player mover now. Let's say player mover. That's the typecast of this variable. Then we're going to call our variable move. And then we're going to say player object dot get component. And this time we're going to get at our player mover script so we can get at the variable speed variable we need on it. All right, so step 2 is done. The first step was, okay, I got to find my player object in the scene. Now I need to get, step 2 was, okay, now I need to get to the scripts or the components on my player object. Step 3 will actually be accessing my bullet speed variable in player fire script right here, and my shoot direction variable and my player mover script. And that's kind of what we've done up here previously. We're going to set my move direction, and move dir is actually the variable assigned or declared inside of my mover. It's what is actually being applied to, in this instance, my bullet. So move direction is going to equal, let's say, well, let's see, move direction. Why do I do, yeah. Well, I'm trying to think. Okay, my move direction needs to be, doesn't it need to be the string that dictates, my right string or my left string that dictates what the bullet direction the bullet will be moving in? So why don't we say move dir equals move dot, and then move dot what? Move dot maybe shoot direction. And look what happens as we start typing shoot direction. Unity's already got us covered. It knows we're looking at my player mover script already, and it knows I have this variable called shoot direction. So it's automatically completing this for me. So we'll say move direction equals move dot shoot direction, and that's all we got to do right there. And then we're going to say move speed equals fire dot bullet speed. All right, so that's the third step done. So, we had to find our player object, then we had to get at the components that house the variables we needed to pass into it, our direction and our speed, and then we had to set the local move and local direction variables that are defined and declared in our mover. We had to set those values equal to those variables we're trying to pass in that dictate what direction our bullet moves in and what speed it travels. So we'll hit Control S, and that's all we need to do for the logic of our mover script. We're starting to see that my mover script is going to be a pretty powerful workhorse. Since obstacles and power-ups and bullets all behave separately, we kind of have to tell them, okay, how do they behave? So we have to have all these conditional checks to dictate the different ways that they move and the different speeds that they move. All right, so we'll hit Control S. And why don't we hit play now and see what happens? Oh, okay, we're coming up with a variable. Let's see what that means. The variable object mesh of mover has not been assigned. All right, so somewhere along the way, we haven't called the right component. So I'm going to double click it and bring that up into here. Mesh. All right, so let's look back at our error message. And here we have a step we forgot to do with our bullet prefab. Let me bring my bullet prefab back into play here. All right, so in all of my mover scripts, it asked me to define the object mesh of whatever I'm trying to move. So I forgot to put my bullet mesh into my object mesh. And why is that useful? I mean, we're not trying to rotate. We were using that earlier to rotate the direction of my hazards or my obstacles. But bullets are spheres. It doesn't matter which rotation they go in. But what if maybe in the future we wanted to make a power up that increases, I don't know, the scale of my bullet or the way it looks or something? Well, maybe bullet object mesh could be useful there. I don't know. But our mover script definitely calls for the object mesh, the actual model of our object. So we have to play ball with it. So I just went ahead and assigned my bullet mesh there and hit apply. So now my bullet prefab in my assets folder is called bullet mesh. So when it's instantiated, we won't get that error message anymore. And there we go. Our player fire is working really nicely. All right, great. So our player fire function, our player fire script rather, is pretty simple. All we're doing is just, as soon as we press the key button down once, we just fire a bullet. There's a lot more you could do with your player fire script. You could have it do automatic fire, or 3-round burst, or spray the bullets in a pattern. But for the simplicity's sake, and this game seems to be a somewhat minimalistic game, we're not going to worry too much about fancy firing functions or firing techniques. You can always go back in and make those kind of changes yourself in your player fire. But right here, all we're doing is pressing spacebar to shoot one bullet in one direction, and I think that suits the needs of our game really well. So it's all about using our mover script that we made and repurposing it for each one of our moving objects in our scene, from power-ups right here to obstacles right there to even our bullets. We're making one script handle all that stuff instead of making 3 different scripts for 3 different moving objects on our screen. And in the end, that'll help our code. There won't be just so many classes to have to keep track of, and we're doing a lot with a little. All right, so thanks for watching this player fire. In the next video, we're gonna start handling collisions. So instead of objects passing through walls and bullets passing through walls, we're gonna start adding the logic to where whenever a moving object collides with something, we're gonna be like, okay, that just happened, and we're going to destroy that object and then trigger whatever kind of game mechanic needs to happen as soon as we collide with something. All right, thanks for watching.